It's a really gender diverse panel we were going here. We're trying to balance out all the men on stage, which seem to be quite a lot this year. In any case, it's really lovely to come after Rose McGowan, who I think we all know has done some incredibly brave things in the United States and started the discussion around gender issues that is long past time we should have been discussing these issues and talking about it. But I'm thrilled to be here with this panel. We were here last year talking about the election. It was right after the inauguration of Donald Trump. And we talked a lot and had a lively discussion about politics and where we are. And we're going to go into it. I will note, this is not just great to have an all-female panel, but we all happen to be lesbians. And these two have started going out in the ensuing year, so we're like an episode of The L Word here. In any case, like a German.
TMI a little bit there.
Right. Die L Word.
Don't worry, we still disagree a lot.
Right, we disagree on a lot of things. So let's start, and Miriam's our new addition. Tammy Haddad last year was there. You're playing Tammy Haddad, and Miriam's obviously a famous German journalist who's done some astonishing...
Miriam's like, what the hell have I got myself into?
Yeah, exactly. So let's just start with the two who were here last year. Megan, you started, let's take an assessment of the last year. We talked about the uses of social media, what was coming, nobody really knew what the Trump administration would entail. Can you give us your thoughts on the past year in politics in the United States?
It's a big question, but I'm going to boil it down to two things. One is that if anyone was at this panel last year, we spent a lot of time talking about economic disruption, this wave. The prior panel before Rose had talked a lot about voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, Rust Belt voters, people who felt left out, the 1%. But when you look at this past year, I think there's two real things. What you can't avoid is the introduction, the reintroduction in an incredibly sad state of affairs of true nativism and true racism back into American politics to a degree that I think hardly anyone of my generation has seen, and is the dehumanization of our political class and a further recalcitration and people believing simply that their political class doesn't have anything vested in them and simply isn't doing anything to make their lives better. I think that's only gotten a lot worse over this past year, and that's pessimistic and sad, but simply truth. And I think the second thing, which from my perspective is I said the same thing last year, but even to a further call, is when the hell are people going to pick their heads up and say, these people do not represent me. These people who have shut down the government, this type of rhetoric that comes out. I mean, when are people going to storm the parapet? When are people going to come for it? When are people going to reclaim their democracy and say, I am not accepting this. This is not what I voted for. These people do not represent me. This is not what our political class can and should be doing. I think, just yesterday we saw a women's march, and people coming out again in the cities. But literally, are we going to wait for the missiles to be coming in from North Korea? When are people really going to pick up their heads and say, enough is enough? Right. And whether that's starting on a small local level, whether that's rising up, whether people really looking at candidacies in a totally different way and disrupting the political classes, and when the media is going to take responsibility and stop covering this as 24-hour entertainment news, which they have been for the past year, despite best efforts of some of us, those are the things that we really need to grapple with.
All right, Hillary? That's great. Those are great thoughts.
I agree with all of that. I do think we should talk about the media's complicity in how we got to where we are, which is something Megan knows too well. And I'm curious about Miriam's perspective. But I do think that we are in a place where, in America sort of started as an idea. And this idea has been at risk all year. This was a country that started with dreamers. And we are now, I think, have started to see the rise again of dreamers. And in fact, it is the young immigrant dreamers that are holding up the deal with the government now, that there is actually an awakening where the noisiest 35% of Americans that support Donald Trump all of a sudden are starting to find themselves more in a minority. That there is actually an activism. The few elections we have seen in our country in the last 3 months have actually had an impact in pushing against the Trump administration. So I think that the sort of false god of Donald Trump, which many of us claimed for a long time, ignored by many people in the media, is much more of a statue that is at risk of toppling now. Not, unfortunately, through legal means, and I'm sure we'll get to that through questions, but through the sort of the things that he is promoting has now made a majority of Americans uncomfortable. The people who haven't risen up are the Republicans in his party who will rue the day that they have stood by this man silently in an effort to get a tax cut. They will rue the day that they did that. And the media, in many respects, will rue the day that they treated him as a normal politician, following his ups and downs. He had a good month with a tax cut and a bad month with a failed health care plan. When they will rue the day when they have started to treat him like a normal.
We'll talk about the media more, because I think they have been pretty hostile they've gotten increasingly hostile towards his presidency.
I would argue in a self-referential way. They're hostile to the way he treats them.
Right.
They're less hostile to what he's doing to the country.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Miriam, you're from the outside. How do you look at this? Hillary just talked about the idea of an idea and dreamer, that it was started by dreamers. As we know, Alexander Hamilton, for example, he came from a shithole country and managed to write the Constitution. Talk a little bit about how it looks from the outside and how Europeans are looking at this.
Well, that's a big topic as well. I think, in the first place, in a way, I hope you're right by touching upon that things might have started to change in the awareness and perception of Donald Trump. I'm actually not that sure about that, and that worries me a lot, because whatever you look at, I think we have not just one elephant in the room, Donald Trump, but we have two elephants in the room. The other elephant might be something like our denial due to outrage that this man still is in office after a year, not letting us perceive or realize that he really is. He ought not be president, but yet he is president. And if you look at the approval rates, for example, that's something that is discussed a lot in Germany, in lots of European countries. You say, okay, they are the lowest ever. No president had such low approval rates, but they're still pretty constant. So he's not losing his support in that group of people who decided to vote for him. And that is something that really scares me. And that's one part of the debate in Europe I see being very prominent at the moment. And I think the basic debate is starting now whether Donald Trump will change our political culture and the whole balance in the world in a way that we haven't really come up with in understanding.
You mean like a viral contagion, that kind of idea that what he's doing works?
Yes, in a way.
Yeah.
But let's face it, and I say this
You're
with
saying he's an
respect.
aberration. You're saying maybe not.
The European leaders have been fairly pussyfooted around Donald Trump. I mean, and some of you might remember what a bully he was in the Republican primary and what a bully he was to Hillary Clinton. He has this way of belittling people who disagree with him or who make him feel less adequate. And it's effective because it shuts them up. And so I do think that he has effectively shut up criticism.
That's not why people are bullied. You can't say that he's belittled. That's ridiculous.
Macron.
There's no way he's belittled them in the same way he did Hillary Clinton.
No, we have situations where he has not faced global consequence for his bromance with Putin. He's not faced global consequence from pulling out of the Paris Accords, or trying to move the embassy in Jerusalem, or calling countries shitholes. There is not a sense that there is a rising up anywhere else in the world.
Because they are sitting back with the same stunning of horror that they cannot actually believe the situation they're in. They cannot believe the displacement of American identity, of American socio-political.
The people are, but the leaders should be different.
There's no question that, and they face consequences. Theresa May has, so has Macron, so has Justin Trudeau, so has Merkel to some extent, although she's been the most standoffish. But here's the thing, the world is grappling with the recidivism of American leadership. The world is grappling with what it looks like to have a country that no longer has a clear point of view, either on global diplomacy, either on its own self-determination, either on domestic policies. The world is grappling with that, and I think you do see that. I don't think it's because he's bullied them. I think because they are looking back and saying, what the hell is this? How do we deal with this? And how do we still forge ahead with Western democratic ideals, which we enshrine with someone who will sit there and take us out of the Paris Climate Accord, with someone who will sit there and get into a nuclear standoff with North Korea, with someone who will sit there and look at destabilizing the entirety of the Middle East, the entirety of our Asian policy. That is what world leaders are grappling with, not with
you
your
can say
pedestrian child bullying.
Let me just let Miriam
but with
say,
that.
you can say grappling. I think it's political fear.
Okay.
And some part of it might look like a game. It is not. We all know that, but it looks
Certainly
like a
is not.
game. So sometimes watching what he's doing seems to me like a bad version of Breaking Bad in politics.
Right.
Walt White was much more intelligent, maybe, or whatever he was. But it's something that you look at this person and you think it must be some kind of a movie series or whatever.
Right.
You can relate to, you can find him, you can like him or you can hate him, you relate to him like a parasocial interaction. You think, well, but that's not real. I think really it will go away. A lot of people think it will go away one or the other day.
And that may be the best reason, that ignoring him is the best solution. That may be what is going on. It's dangerous,
let's
but it
get
might
to
be
that
what's going
idea
on.
of distraction. You're talking about distraction politics, really, in that I was, when the Bannon book, which was only a week ago or something, at 1 week it was like Bannon, shithole, oh, we're threatening North Korea again. It was in the space of 4 days. So
Does everybody know about this book?
the book
that Michael Wolff wrote?
Michael Wolff
that
read. And I
Everybody
called
in the
my
White House said nobody talked to Michael Wolff, and they never let him in, even though he was there 50 times.
Right. So it was basically, it was a gossipy book, really, pretty much a political gossip book. I was talking to I called my son, who's 12, and I said, what do you think of the book? Because he's very politically aware. And I said, what about this? What about this? And he goes, Mom, you're being totally distracted. He just appointed this many judges, this many things. You need to stop focusing on the inner politics of the White House. And I was like, yeah, I know, but look at Steve Bannon. He called him Sloppy Steve. And I realized that I had been sucked into the discussion, like very easily, that you get sucked into the discussion. And there was a story in the New York Times today about that, this idea of time curving back on itself, because what Miriam talked about, this distractibility. So talk about that and how you get out of that cycle, because it does seem like every week it is like being caught in an awful Donald Trump
So you know how
reality.
they got out of that cycle?
What?
2 words for you, Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah Winfrey.
The
okay.
media spent 3 days talking about Oprah Winfrey as a candidate for president, even though Oprah Winfrey, on that same exact night that her name came up, that she gave that speech, told a reporter face-to-face, word-to-word, I am not running for president in 2020. Did you see that? No. You saw endless people on TV, on cable news, talking about Oprah as a candidate. You talk endless friends of Oprah whispering that, friends of Oprah whispering this. Oh, Donald Trump says, bring Oprah on. It is absurd. It is ridiculous. It debases us all. It is insulting as a journalist to have seen that 3-day cycle. And Jeff, you know I'm right on that.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. How do we move on from that? We can try and pick topics. So as editor of Business Week, for example, I said to myself, there's 2 things I really want to tell the story of this year. I want to talk about what life is really like on the front lines of America's manufacturing classes. What is the real truth of displacement of jobs, of low-wage workers, of what it is like to work these jobs, about the immigration factor, to get in on the front lines of people who are literally risking their lives and are crushed up still in machinery in 2018 to make $10 an hour. Let's tell that story and let's put it on the front lines about the inequality and the shit that we see in this country. And the second thing was Facebook and the power that they hold in countries that we don't even understand to influence supposedly democratic elections. Not just America, not fake news. And by the way, it was real news that disrupted the American election, not fake news. But in places like the Philippines, in places in South America, and other places where we don't quite understand the power they've had to influence the debate. You can try as a journalist, and I'm only speaking as a journalist, to try and really make a difference, to make influence, and all it does is just throwing it out there into the ether. It's so hard to get traction. Do you know how frustrating that is when you're delivering that, putting those resources in to tell the stories on the ground? Because we live still in a society that is TV-centric, where people have shifted to mobile, where the attention span has compressed. And I think the only thing we can do is to keep fighting the good fight and to try and galvanize citizens too, and citizen journalists to say, tell these stories with us. Go out to your community. What is the difference between that factory staying open, that cafe staying open, these jobs staying, making sure these immigrants have what they need to be successful, giving people the skills they need to compete in the next generation economy, not the current economy. These things that are really important. Maybe bringing politicians to the table. I would love the day when politicians were willing to sit down with me and have a discussion about a next generation skills-based economy and not the private sector, which, Kara, you do such a great job of bringing the private sector to the table, but that's what we're left with right now.
So Miriam, when she was talking about this, the idea of how the American media is complicit in this, you all have a much less screamy media at this point. It's a reactive media. How do you look at it, and what do you imagine the solution being? Because the political coverage is sort of cable 24/7, different sides. You'll have in the U.S. you'll have Fox News versus CNN essentially,
and totally partisan, which
totally
is not true for.
And you could switch. You could have a channel where he said something like the shithole comment last week, and it was 24/7 on MSNBC and CNN, and over at Fox they were doing Hillary's emails still. They're still. And what about the emails? It was fast. I was like, what?
By the way, that's true, actually.
No, it's
They were
true.
doing that.
Don't joke. It's about the emails, or then some people I never heard of, and then they hardly get to what's actually being discussed. Is it wrong to not cover those comments? Because, for example, Twitter got into a lot of hot water over saying we're not going to throw him off because he's the president of the United States. It is news when the president says something, whatever horrible thing he says.
I think it's a really difficult question because if you look at how Donald Trump does politics, then Twitter is his way of governing, whether you like it or not. And so not covering it means you just ignore the way the president executively does his job. And I think you can't do that as a journalist.
Right.
The second question is, how do you cover those eruptions of interesting content once in a while?
Every day, every morning at 6. Go ahead.
The same question like violent pictures or whatever. You can talk about it, you can describe it, you can maybe show parts of it, but you don't need to blast people in the face all the time. What's happening there? So I think there is a fine line of differentiating between ignoring it, which you can't do, I think, and doing it in a way where you can distance yourself in reporting about it and not featuring it on screen or in the paper.
Well, I think this is the issue that I think where tech really bears some responsibility, which is the reason why, for instance, local media is so scarce in multiple jurisdictions across the United States. The reason why there is so little reach for local news, for actually broadcast news in many respects, and even cable has such limited distribution, is really because Google and Facebook have sucked up all of the advertising dollars in the country. Now, whether they did it cleverly or illegally or legally or not, it's irrelevant. It's just, it means that it's done. And it means that they are essentially the news outlets. And so unless there is more focus on how you take that technology and localize it and make it be more substantive and more responsible and have that kind of social connection to the news that matters, nothing is going to change.
Well, you know, it's
because
interesting.
the general, what we think of as the mainstream media has a smaller and smaller and smaller audience. You know, I love Megan's Business Week stories, but the size of their audience compared to...
It's huge.
Not so huge compared to what it could be or what
Right.
it should be.
Or was.
Is so small.
Yeah.
And that is a technology issue. That is because there is no money in advertising in media
So
anymore.
talk about that
But there
concept.
should be.
There should be, but there isn't. It's not. People don't see it as a public good, except maybe Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post or whatever billionaire is going to somehow give money to the New York Times at some point in the future.
But even the Washington Post used to have a wire service that went free to essentially every small town paper in America,
And now it does not.
and now it does not.
Yeah. So talk about this, because this concept is a lot of these tech companies, when you go, and Elliot did it this morning, we're just a platform. We are just here to deliver, which I think is bullshit. I agree. I think they have some, it's a different kind of media company. It is certainly not a media, but they certainly don't feel that they have the responsibility at all. At all of them. It's not just them. It's Twitter. I hate to say it, but I think Snapchat feels the most responsibility for curating its platform of all things. You know, whatever you think of the stuff they put on there, they spend time picking and choosing news sources. And you may not like the Daily Mail or Cosmopolitan, but they actually are picking news sources that are
They're putting news sources directly into the platform.
But yes,
as opposed
exactly.
to-
But here's the thing. I mean, a little inside. After this panel last year, we all went to a tiki bar, and probably, as you do at a tiki bar, probably have too many tropical drinks. But we had a quite serious argument about this.
Yeah.
And the issue is
with a Facebook executive.
with a Facebook executive. I was wondering if that person was here this year. But here's the thing. I mean, I have tremendous sympathy for the argument that we don't want to be in the game of picking and choosing content. And I think probably everyone in this room agrees that the strategy now of allowing users to rank by trustworthy content in terms of filtering their newsfeed is very problematic, in the sense is there's a huge risk of confirmation bias. So if you already believe that Fox News and Breitbart and things that skew right, or on the other side, you already believe that the Huffington Post and other sources that skew left are trustworthy, I'm not quite sure how that algorithm is going to work out in terms of being a more efficient filter of the news you should read or et cetera. I am not a believer that there is a paternalism involved in the platform countries in terms of this is green vegetables, read this, it's good for you, this is the kosher news. So I do have tremendous sympathy on that aspect. What I absolutely have zero sympathy for is the argument that you are not a media company anymore. You make money, you make tremendous, tremendous sums of money by watching my eyeballs and what I consume and providing me, whether that's advertisements in terms of what I can buy, or certainly advertisements, what I consume as media to read. That is essentially, that is your business. Don't pretend that let's all be happy friends from college and look at what people are doing. No, your business is selling me crap. And that goes the same as media as it goes to stuff. Mm-hmm. So that, to make that argument is ludicrous, but what we need to really think about is, do we have the regulation that's flexible and forward-looking enough to deal with this? Do we want content referees? Do we want moderators? Do we want an entirely different system of looking up this, breaking this up, of making them get the same licenses that I have to go through? I could not put up a political advertisement that is of the ilk, as you know, of 99% of what we saw during that election in terms of just totally fake, 100% wrong advertisement. It is a crime against democracy, and it is not just going on in America or in Western. As I said, the biggest problems are in countries like the Philippines, et cetera. We need to take a stand. People need to be aware of it, and we need to do something about it.
Miriam, who is going to regulate that? That's an excellent point, but who is going to pick it? Because at this point in our country, if you think I want Mitch McConnell involved in this, no.
I wouldn't
not
be
so much.
too optimistic that your country is going to be regulating it. Actually.
No, not at all. I mean, I think the world now relies on Marguerite Vestager at this point, really, pretty much.
She's trying hard, and sometimes she succeeds, and sometimes she doesn't. But still, she's exactly taking this approach in a way that you're alluding to. And it's difficult because in Germany we have a new law that's supposed to protect people from insults and harassment, sexual harassment, whatever. And you in the first weeks you see how difficult it is. So that a lot of things get erased, which definitely should not be erased. And it's like you're touching the question of censorship very, very easily. And I don't think that this is the way how you could deal with it. And probably it's much more difficult, but we need to go a step further. So if I may, I take one more round and would say, what's happening is that we have a lot of different factors that come together and allow a situation to evolve like we have today, a situation with Donald Trump. You have the tech industry with the monopolization processes and strategies and the platform issue. But you also have a situation where you have a lot of divides in lots of countries. In Germany, the same. In France, before Emmanuel Macron has started to try to get things together again. Look at Brexit. Wherever we look, we see examples for divides, fractions, and things going not really well. And so this is exactly a situation where a person like Donald Trump resonates, and that's why people voted for him. So if you look at what's happening in terms of nationalism, for example, it has a huge base of resonance in lots of countries. If Emmanuel Macron tomorrow invites like 100 business leaders to France before they go to the World Economic Forum, and he invites them and he wants to talk about joining forces and requests that they bring ideas for investment, that's a very much nicer approach. And it's probably lovely to dine with him at Versailles, and all those things, but still it's nationalism. It's a nationalistic economic approach. And so what we see from Donald Trump is not just related to the media, but it goes down from the example. This guy in the Oval Office sets, and everybody thinks he can behave or she can behave similarly, over the range of different trends of renationalization, up to the fact that the platforms and the technology infrastructure is very, very likely to help this situation. So regulating, I think, is not enough.
I think that's a really important point in that we cannot expect global corporations to take on the role of helping us to manage society.
And we don't want that,
We've just lost that opportunity. No, and you know, for every company that Macron brings to Versailles, they've also had to meet, you know, the week before with Donald Trump or our Treasury Secretary. I mean, we see now the tech major, you know, the big 5 tech companies falling over themselves to make announcements about their investments in the United States because they feel like there is a backlash.
Because they have to say it.
Against them,
yeah.
That they have to be more pro-American, yet they need to be more pro-German, they need to be more pro-Chinese, they need to be more pro-Latin America. They have to be global corporations.
Well, interesting. So behind the scenes, they're like, oh, for fuck's sake.
Oh, for fuck's sake, who are we going to kowtow next?
Right,
to next?
right.
And how do we manage that? And that is why it does require a different kind of leadership. And I will say that I do think that despite the sort of the natural thrill to blame tech companies for spreading the word, I will say one of the reasons why the Oprah thing took hold is because, you know, good ideas and excitement will break through.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea
and
of
the
it
fact
is
that
what was
it was actually social media that made Oprah all of a sudden a presidential candidate.
Right.
It wasn't Oprah.
So let's,
Was a good idea.
Stop with the Oprah. Let us have a moment of Oprah, okay?
Totally
we need
down.
a moment
I'm from
of
Chicago,
Oprah.
man, so
it's a year
I'm
of
not
Trump. We
dissing.
need 3 days of Oprah. We'll take it. Because it does make you feel better as a country. You know what I mean? That there is also this anti-force.
That there's a rise up. There is a, if people have good
she's
ideas,
representative.
people
It's not
will
silly.
say the
It's
right
not,
thing.
People did feel better
They can break
briefly.
through.
And I think they felt hopeful for a minute. So we're going to have a couple questions from from the audience in about 2 minutes. What do you think the big topics going forward? Because as distracting as Donald Trump is, and he didn't get the healthcare thing, but he certainly got tax reform, got the judges in place. There's all kinds of, the economy's in good shape. There's all kinds of positives that people are now pointing to for him. Where do you see it going, and what role does the Democrats in the United States play? How do you, just very briefly, because I want to get to questions.
Okay, so very, very briefly, I would say it's the number one thing. It's the creation of a permanent underclass, and it's the set of policy choices and developments that are really leading to this creation, not only of something that's, when we talk about inequality and wealth disproportionately, the wealth generation of the past 2 decades going disproportionately to the top 0.001%, it is the inability of people in the bottom third of this of America and of other Western democracies to actually advance in a situation that is unprecedented, because we don't have the reskilling and the looking at the changes that we need to make in the face of AI, automation, disruption, to be able to lift generations out of poverty and to give them a chance in the future. That is the biggest challenge we face as a society in America. It's one you never hear people talk about as much as they should, in terms of how we break out of this and the policy decisions that need to be made now in terms of infrastructure, reskilling, jobs. And it's not relocating manufacturing jobs. It really is a rethinking of our education, and that is the number one thing we should talk about and talk about every single day.
Well, I agree with that. I also think we've seen this year fewer jobs created in Donald Trump's first year than any one of Barack Obama's 8 years as president. That's not a statistic that gets much attention, but it's actually true. So that there is wealth being created, but it's obviously being created at the top with a exploding stock market and corporate tax cuts. I think the other key area where we Democrats, I think, have to focus, they have to find ways to make it to make investment in jobs and clean energy and infrastructure, to take what was $1.5 trillion giveaway to corporations. And let's say I actually was for an international tax system for reform, but that only cost $250 billion of us. There was another trillion given away that didn't need to be given away. So I think you're going to see Democrats more and more talk about the kind of priorities that need to be given. And we have actually lost more jobs in the retail sector in the United States than we have in manufacturing. Also little known. And so how do you deal with that kind of disruption? Very difficult.
Yes, around AI, automation, robotics, all the others. Miriam, and then we'll get to any questions we have.
Well, I hope that some of the Democrats might take the chance to try to build up and expand the network on an international scale, because if you look at the relationship between Germany and the US, there is none at the moment.
Yeah.
Mrs. Merkel might be able to form a government in this year, at some point of time after the decision of the Social Democrats today, but still, they don't talk. So, and you don't have any channels into the White House like it was in former times under the Obama legislation, and that's really bad, and that's dangerous. And so I think taking into account that there might be a swift and a change in political priorities, then it would be really great if a lot of people could just take up the good relations, not just to Germany, but to also other European countries and countries all over the world, to be able to reinvigorate what has been destroyed up to now.
Okay. All right, questions from the audience? Jeff, go ahead. Go ahead. I don't know if there's a thing. Just speak up.
Screw over for president, Megan for president. This is my favorite event. Megan, you can start off with a whole
Okay, so I have a very easy answer to that, and that is stop normalizing and think meta. And that's what I always think about every day, is like, people say to me, the judges and tax reform and these things have gotten done, and there's 12 federal appeal court justices and there were only 3 during Obama's first term, and they got this comprehensive tax reform through, and it looks like the wall's going to be funded. At what price? At what price? The total destabilization of foreign policy, the total unpredictability, the people waking up at 4 in the morning and sitting over their screens to type in a tweet that literally could be something, there's Kim Jong-un is the worst person, he's such a baddie. I mean, what in hell? What in God's name? Like, yes, we need to report it. Do we need to normalize it? Do we need to justify it? Do we need to explain it? Do we need to treat this? This is a democracy, a functioning democracy? Hell no. No, we don't, and we don't need to do that anymore. And we're better than that. And as a media, we're better than that. As a society, we're better than that. So I always think, where do we want to go? Where do we want our children? What do we want them to inherit? What kind of world do we really stand up for? Is it on climate? Is it on jobs? Is it on that we believe that people who are less fortunate than the people who are at this conference deserve better opportunities, deserve to move forward in this world with a future that we can give them? Yes, we do. And we are willing to put ourselves forward as private companies and as a public sector.
But we also have to be more practical, which is that.
Yeah.
You guys are talking about Oprah. You're the ones on practicality?
We have to be practical.
We just like Oprah.
Give me a break.
You live in New York. There are 3 congressional districts in upstate New York that are held by Republicans that could turn. Our only hope in stopping Donald Trump right now and having leaders who actually have a platform and authority to go around the world and help speak for America that add to Donald Trump's voice. And you have to know, I've given speeches around the world for many, many years. This is I've always been one of those patriotism, stops at the border's edge. To talk constantly against my government is horrifying to me. But that is our only option. Everybody you know in New York has to go to those 3 congressional districts in New York. The only way we are going to stop this is to take back our country, and the only way we are going to take back our country is by the same ideals by which it was founded, which is to vote. That's it.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the elections that was one of the winning elections was Roy Moore, but the fact that it was so close, and he's so obviously a pedophile, that it was amazing. And then we thought that was a victory.
Ending on a high note.
On a high note. Well, we didn't elect a pedophile, so there's hope for us yet. Right here and then here. Super quick.
Hi. I'm Jamaican, and I just became an American citizen.
Congratulations.
Woo! And because I do believe, at the end of the day, fiercely Jamaican, the ideals of what America stands for. And I just wanted to get your opinion on the fact that from where I stand or where I see things, there's an issue with the incentives that exist for politicians. They continue to make great short-term decisions for themselves that have a really serious implication on individuals and the society at large in the U.S.
Yeah.
And I think to myself about how different countries, and regions are moving ahead, and people, there's no focus on that and that relative race, and how do you create an index to show people that,
I'm going to answer that one. I think one of the issues is not as much, I'm not so angry at Donald Trump anymore. I just think he's crazy, and it's kind of completely obvious. It's the enablers who aren't. And I think it's the same thing, both Meg and I covered Uber a lot. You can say what you think about Travis Kalanick, but the enablers, to me, were the real problem because they knew better. And I think right now, that's my focus on those people. So really quickly, there's lots of enablers.
So maybe I start where you just left it off. I think I heard you suggest, I should introduce myself, Johan Butting from Slack Technologies. I think I heard you say some kind of content creation and programming needs to be reintroduced into media, given that the technology platforms have taken that away. How do you want to do that? I would love to understand from the podium some ideas what you would love to do to make that happen. Thank you.
I don't know. Facebook's kind of big. What do you think, Megan? It's hard. It's really hard.
Well, I think, as we just heard, there is a lot of good content being created.
Yeah.
I think what we're missing, actually, is better distribution of that good content.
Yeah.
And a different kind of distribution as well. So what we are doing here, debating 1 year of Donald Trump, is in a way some kind of journalism, I would say. And so my experience is we're doing this quite a lot, that if you get together with people and you discuss your reporting, then you get back immediate responses. You can relate to the people, you can have arguments, and that's much more of an impact maybe than just reading something.
Can I just say one more quick point in response to the short-termism argument, because I think it's really important. Short-termism is not just confined to the U.S., obviously. If we look at Brexit, if we retook that Brexit vote, the results, although I'm not sure, people want a second chance. There is nothing wrong with giving people a chance to say we made a mistake, to go back, to say let's have a rational debate. Looks like if we had a budget shutdown, we need to have more of an acceptance of mistake, of failure, of moving forward, and treating our public sector much more we like to a private sector, much more like a startup, frankly, and give people a vest to say like, you know what, we tried that, and that's a totally bad idea, and that's catastrophic, and we need to row back. Let's have the acceptance to let our political leaders fail like we do, and look at that bankruptcy and move forward. It is not a winner-take-all game, for God's sakes. This is real stakes. This is real crap we're playing for. And we need to have that understanding that stuff's going to happen that's good and stuff's going to happen that's bad. But if we move forward together towards a common vision and a belief for the future, we can get through this. But it's going to be bumpy, for God's sakes.
All right, last thing. We don't have room for any more questions. I'm sorry, but you can ask all these guys. What is your one prediction for the next year, very briefly?
I think there's one moment of hope, because Donald Trump doesn't evolve. He just stays as he is in his weirdness and randomness. He just stays as he is, and so he's a wonderful example for all the evangelists that evolution theory is crap. But it's a wonderful example and opportunity for us to predict what might happen in this sphere of weirdness and better deal with it, like we discussed here.
Look, I think, as everybody knows, there is an investigation of the Trump administration and its relationship with Russia prior to the election. I think there will be obstruction of justice charges brought, but I don't think they're necessarily going to be to reach President Trump. But I think it's going to weaken the Republicans who even further, and I think Democrats are going to take back one house, which doesn't give power, it just balances out the bad shit.
Yours?
No one's coming to save you. It's up to us, and it's a long-term game. And people need to be vested and get in and get in and get into play and get in to win, because there's just going to be more politics, more shutdowns, more Schumer shutdown, more of this crap. We need to all take
Trump shutdown.
We need to take back
Shutdown.
crap. We need to take back our government and take back our own personal responsibility.
So, revolution for this one right here.
No, what's
Don't
it
give
called?
this lady a gun.
Don't give this lady a cocktail.
All right. My prediction is that our country has been through lunacy many times. We're historically ignorant all the time of what's happened. And I always think, I've just been reading a lot about the Army McCarthy hearings when our country went crazy. And that guy had control of this country for a long time. It wasn't a month, it was years. And it took one person, and it wasn't just one person, but at long last, have you no shame. I think we are heading towards that, and the ratings will go down for the reality show that is America right now, and then it will be over, and we'll wonder what the hell happened.
And look at the damage.
You look at the damage.
but
There'll
rebuild,
be damage.
but
There
rebuild.
is damage. But thank you so much. These are amazing
Thank you, guys.
panelists.